Hello, my name is Sophia Flesch, and I am excited to present my Applied Nutrition Capstone project titled Do Gardening and Horticultural-Based Interventions Improve Physical Activity? A Systematic Review. My name is Sophia Flesch. I am a registered dietitian nutritionist and licensed dietitian. I obtained my Bachelor of Science from Michigan State University and completed my dietetic internship at North Shore University Health System in Chicago, Illinois. I am currently a Master of Science candidate in Applied Nutrition from the University of New England with an anticipated graduation date of December 2020. My professional experience includes 6+ years of corporate and food service nutrition at Aramark, currently working as the Senior Nutrition Manager on the Nutrition Operational Support Services team within their Correctional Services line of business. I was also a RD Nutrition Counseling Coach for an app called Eat with Ava. As the title suggests, the objective of this presentation is to comprehensively evaluate the evidence on gardening and horticultural-based interventions and their impact on physical activity levels. To provide an outline of today's presentation, I will provide an introduction and complete literature review of both physical activity and gardening and horticultural-based interventions, which will lead us into the research question and methodology, in which I will describe the search and selection strategy. Then, from the methodology, we will do a synthesis and comparison of the included study's results, and for our discussion, we will interpret and describe the significance of the results, as well as discuss any limitations presented, outline implications for future research and practice, and lastly, provide an overall conclusion. Obesity continues to be an ongoing epidemic in the United States across all age and socioeconomic groups. Current U.S. obesity statistics indicate that 18.5% of children and adolescents and 42.4% of adults have obesity. Obesity's health consequences range across the lifespan and include mortality, increased risk of premature death, and increased risk for the development of non-communicable diseases, or NCDs, including diabetes, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, stroke, and certain forms of cancer that can greatly impact quality. Therefore, promoting healthful behaviors across the lifespan is critical to address the obesity crisis. Similar to obesity, physical activity is also an important determinant of health and a modifiable risk factor that is often recommended for the treatment and prevention of obesity and NCDs for both children and adults. Additionally, improving health, fitness, and quality of life through regular physical activity is a goal and objective of Healthy People 2030. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, or DHHS, defines physical activity as any bodily movement produced by the contraction of skeletal muscle that increases energy expenditure above a basal or resting level. The U.S. DHHS also outlines physical activity recommendations per age group. No vigor or time-specific guidelines are outlined for preschool-age children, but for children and adolescents ages 6 through 17, 60 minutes or more of daily moderate to vigorous physical activity is recommended. Muscle strengthening and bone strengthening physical activity at least 3 times per week is also recommended for this age group. For adults ages 18 through 64, the DHHS recommends at least 150 to 300 minutes of moderate intensity or 75 to 150 minutes of vigorous intensity physical activity per week. For additional health benefits, muscle strengthening for all major muscle groups for 2 or more days per week is also recommended. The physical activity recommendations for older adults ages 65 and above are the same as the adult age group, but they are also encouraged to incorporate multi-component physical activity into their routines, such as balance training. Physical activity also has several benefits across the lifespan. For children and adolescents, participating in regular physical activity results in improved bone health, weight status, cardiorespiratory and muscular fitness, cognition, self-esteem, and self-confidence, and a reduced risk of depression. All of these benefits are critical for the health, growth, and development of children through the optimization of cardiometabolic health and prevention of chronic disease. For adults, participation in regular physical activity includes improvements in bone health, cognitive and physical functioning, and sleep. There is also a reduced risk of mortality, NCDs, an adverse blood lipid profile, risk of falls or fall-related injuries, depression, anxiety, and weight gain, etc. All of these benefits for adults can lead to improved quality of life and decreased duration of disability in a person's lifetime. However, despite these benefits, most individuals do not meet the recommended physical activity guidelines. Only 1 in 4 adults and 1 in 5 children and adolescents meet the physical activity guidelines for aerobic and muscle strengthening activities. The World Health Organization suggests that this is a result of individuals being less active during leisure time, the increase in screen time from TV, computers, etc. during operational and recreational activities, both of which correlate to physical inactivity. There is also literature that suggests that physical inactivity is related to our physical and built environments, or the physical parts of where individuals live, work, and shop. These include access to sidewalks, public recreation space and infrastructure, prevalence of neighborhood crime and violence, area deprivation, and low air quality pollution. A decreased land use mix, which is the amount of different types of use for land, such as office space, retail space, schools, clinics, hospitals, etc., all of which contribute to the built environment, can also reduce the ability or desire to walk or ride a bike, which again limits the ability to incorporate more physical activity. As a result of the built environment, strategies that make it safer and easier to get active can help children and adults increase their physical activity. This can be achieved by promoting physical activity in the home, at school, at child care centers, community centers, senior centers, etc. Physical activity that takes place outside has also been promoted in the literature as a means to foster children and adults' physical and mental health. Other successful interventions include revisions to the school curriculum, such as including a health class, physical education class, or sporting requirements for children, or revising the care plan for older adults, and the addition or increase of community or after-school programs. Overall, interventions to increase physical activity should emphasize behavioral or environmental strategies over cognitive strategies. This is why gardening and horticultural-based interventions have recently been conceptualized as a potential behavior and environmental intervention to increase physical activity. But what do we know about gardening and horticultural-based interventions? There is an extensive number of definitions for both gardening and horticultural-based interventions that vary by both type and setting. This includes, among others, community, school, and urban gardens, or any other gardening or horticultural-related programming or therapy through indoor or outside gardens, microfarms, or container gardens. This definition also includes other alternative gardening methods that allow individuals to receive hands-on experience with planting, growing, and harvesting plants, flowers, fruits, and vegetables, such as mulching, weeding, cutting flowers and stems, etc. Garden and horticultural-based interventions have greatly increased in popularity by approximately 44% in the past 6 to 8 years due to their environmental and community benefits. Today, there are more than 29,000 garden plots in city parks in just 100 of the largest U.S. cities, which is up 22% from 2017. Additionally, gardening is also the second most common reported leisure time physical activity among the older adult population. As I mentioned previously, the increase in gardening and horticultural interventions is due to the numerous environmental and community benefits. The addition of community, school, and urban gardens as a way to promote gardening and horticultural-based interventions can help reduce negative environmental impacts through the promotion of sustainable agriculture by reducing food transportation costs and the number of food miles, and decreasing the amount of water. Humans, plants, and animals all benefit from the environmental impacts of implementing gardens since they improve the ecology of the area where it is implemented through the increased amount of biodiversity, improved air and soil quality, replacement of impervious structures to improve water infiltration, and reduce neighborhood waste via the implementation of composting. Given the current health status of the U.S., there is an increase in demand for healthcare professionals to explore alternative non-medical approaches that empower patients with NCDs to reduce their dependence on health and social care services. This is known as social prescribing, a non-medical method of care which links patients in primary care with sources of support within the community to help improve their health and well-being, and is utilized across all age groups. The very definition of gardening and horticultural-based interventions aligns with the framework of social prescribing and works to foster more healthful communities. As promotion and accessibility of healthy lifestyles are characteristics of a healthful community, gardening and other horticultural-based interventions have increased in prevalence as a social prescription, resulting in their dietary, physical, and cognitive health benefits being extensively researched. These benefits include increased fruit and vegetable consumption, identification, willingness to try new types of fruit and vegetables, and the confidence in how to consume or prepare them, especially within the youth population. This leads to reductions in BMI, obesity and metabolic risk, and an increase in fiber consumption. A 2015 randomized controlled trial found that there was an increase in overall science knowledge among low-income children following the implementation of a garden intervention. Garden and horticultural-based interventions are also known to improve the psychosocial and mental well-being, ultimately improving quality of life. This is true across all age groups and produces a decrease in stress determined by salivary cortisol concentrations during periods of stress recovery, especially in regards to interpersonal relationships, school life, personal problems, and home life, and improvements of mood during intervention and overall, and significant increases in level of happiness. Social ties and greater sense of community are also valuable benefits to gardening and horticultural-based interventions, which help reduce crime and empower and allow residents to feel safe in their neighborhoods, which is key for successful physical activity interventions. Gardens in urban areas are positively correlated with decreased crime rates, since vacant lands can lead to crime. Vacant lands decrease property value, increase drug use, as well as have negative environmental impacts related to illegal dumping of water, tires, and chemicals. Lastly, gardens also have the ability to provide economic and skill-building opportunities, especially for the low-income and food-insecure population. Economic benefits arise as a result of increased access and affordability to fresh fruits and vegetables, since they do not have to purchase them at the grocery store, especially if they're living in a food desert. Gardens can also teach individuals useful skills in planning, food production, and business, which can assist in securing a future job opportunity in the food service, retail, or warehouse industries. Given the aforementioned literature review, there is a need to comprehensively evaluate the evidence of gardening and horticultural-based interventions and their impact on physical activity levels. Specifically, this systematic review of the current research aims to answer the following research question: do gardening and horticultural-based interventions improve physical activity across all age groups? A review protocol was developed based on the preferred reporting items for systematic reviews and meta-analysis, or PRISMA, statements. PubMed, Embase, and CINAHL databases were searched from 1990 to the present. The references within relevant articles were also reviewed and identified for additional included studies. To perform the search within each database, the keywords displayed on the screen were searched individually and in various combinations, including synonyms and closely related words. Studies were considered eligible for inclusion if they were full text, published in the English language, conducted in developed countries, utilized gardening or horticultural-based interventions, and investigated physical activity. No age group was specified or restricted, and due to the small number of available studies, all quantitative and qualitative study designs were included in the systematic review. Multi-component interventions were included as long as physical activity was measured and the gardening or horticultural intervention was discussed and evaluated in detail. It is important to note that the definition for gardening and horticultural-based interventions were the same as described in previous slides. Studies were excluded or considered ineligible for inclusion if they were not originally published in the English language, were conducted in underdeveloped countries, did not utilize gardening or horticultural-based interventions, and if physical activity was not a measured parameter. Conference abstracts were also excluded, and this exclusion criteria provided a more homogeneous sample. A flow diagram, which is included on the right-hand side of the slide, outlines the article's search, screen, and selection process in more detail that led to the inclusion of 15 studies. One reviewer, myself, independently reviewed all articles identified using the eligibility requirements outlined in the previous slide using a standardized data extraction form from the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, or A&D, Evidence Analysis Manual. In this systematic review, determination of the quality of studies was guided by the Quality Criteria Checklist, or QCC, for primary research within the A&D Evidence Analysis Manual. Each included article was assigned one of 3 ratings using the QCC: positive, neutral, or negative. Ratings were based on answers to 4 relevance questions that addressed the applicability to practice, and 10 validity questions that addressed the scientific soundness, based on the details reported in each article. A full table outlining the characteristics of each included studies is available upon request. The primary analytic goal was to determine the efficacy of gardening and horticultural-based interventions on physical activity levels. The outcome of each study was compared to the purpose or objectives of the study to determine if the gardening or horticultural-based intervention was successful. Once validated, the contributing factors assessed included study design, purpose, and population, the intervention description and duration of the intervention, measured parameters, and the results of the study. As I mentioned previously, the outline search and selection process resulted in a total of 15 studies that were included in this review. Of the 15 studies, 10 were given a positive rating, 3 were given a neutral rating, and 2 were given a negative rating. Since the existing studies provide conflicting information, I'll provide a discussion of some positive studies along with some neutral and negative rated studies. The first study I will discuss was a randomized controlled trial published in 2014 in Preventative Medicine. It sought to examine the effects of a school garden intervention on elementary school children's physical activity levels. School-aged children was defined as children in grades 4 and 5, which included children that were 8 to 12 years old. 255 children participated in the study that were recruited from 12 different low-income schools in New York. 6 schools were randomly assigned to receive a 1-year school garden intervention, and the remaining 6 schools were put on the wait list or control group to receive the school garden intervention at a later date. Physical activity, including time spent sedentary, was the only measured parameter. The study found that children participating in the garden intervention had experienced a decrease in usual amount of sedentary time, which was determined via survey data, and an increase in the percent of time spent in moderate to vigorous physical activity, which was determined via accelerometry data, compared to baseline and the control group. Overall, the study earned a positive quality rating. The second study I will discuss was also a randomized controlled trial published this year in Childhood Obesity. Its purpose was to assess individual and combined effects of school-based gardening and physical activity interventions on children's eating and physical activity behaviors and obesity status, otherwise known as the Texas Grow, Eat, Go, or TGEG study. A total of 1,326 third-grade students in Texas participated in the study, and for 6 months they were randomized into one of 4 groups. These groups included a group that received a school vegetable garden intervention, otherwise known as the Learn, Grow, Eat, Go, or LGEG group, or they were placed in a school-based physical activity intervention group, or known as the Walk Across Texas or the WAT group, or a combined group of both the LGEG and WAT interventions, or a control group that did not receive any intervention. This study measured a variety of parameters in addition to physical activity, including nutrition knowledge, BMI, vegetable preference, and number of vegetables tasted. Interestingly, the results of the study found only children in the WAT group experienced significant increases in physical activity. Children in the LGEG or combination group showed significant increases in improvements in health-related indicators such as BMI, nutrition knowledge, and vegetable consumption. Overall, the study also earned a positive quality rating. Another reviewed study I will discuss was a pilot study published in 2006 that sought to examine the effects of a community garden activity at a senior center would have on the level of functional health, depression, and physical fitness for independent living older adults. A total of 6 subjects were recruited and deemed eligible to participate from a senior center located in upstate New York, with ages ranging from 57 to 78. The gardening and horticultural-based intervention was participation in a community container garden at the senior center in which they resided. Measured parameters included those measured by the Dartmouth Functional Health Assessment, Another reviewed study I will discuss was a pilot study published in 2006 that sought to examine the effects of a community garden would have at a senior center in terms of functional health, depression, and physical fitness for independent living older adults. A total of 6 subjects were recruited and deemed eligible to participate from a senior center located in upstate New York, with ages ranging from 57 to 78. The gardening and horticultural-based intervention included participation in a community container garden at the senior center in which they resided in. Measured parameters included those measured by the Dartmouth Functional Health Assessment Chart, and following intervention, the only significant improvements were found in the increase in total emotional score and in social activities due to the increased and consistent interaction with other gardeners participating in the study. There was an improved function noted in physical fitness and other psychosocial indicators, but they were not significant. Functional health scores declined at the post-test for daily activities and pain, but were also not significant. Overall, the study earned a neutral quality rating. The last study I will briefly review for the audience was an ecological study published in 2003 in the American Journal of Public Health with the purpose to conduct a pre- and post-evaluation of youth behaviors from 6 different garden programs developed as a part of the California Healthy Cities and Community Initiatives. Age of youth participants was not specified in the study, and the duration and type of gardening programs, including activities offered in addition to the gardening intervention, such as nutrition education, differed depending on the city. The most common parameter measured was physical activity and fruit and vegetable consumption. 2 cities found that self-reported physical activity sessions increased with participants who participated in a gardening-based intervention. 1 city experienced an increase in intent to improve eating habits, and another experienced an increase in the consumption of fruits and vegetables. Overall, this study earned a negative quality rating. As a whole, articles were published over a 17-year period from 2003 to 2020. A majority of the studies reviewed were conducted in the U.S., with the remaining studies conducted in other developed countries such as South Korea, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. Intervention lengths range from 1 month to 1 year, with the majority of studies lasting 1 year. Across all studies, the total number of participants was 11,345, with each study ranging from 6 to 8,500 participants maximum. Of the 15 reviewed studies, only 1 examined preschool-aged children, 11 examined various combinations of the children and adolescent age group, 3 examined older adults, considered to be ages 65 and up, and 1 study examined both adults and older adults. No included studies examined exclusively the adult population defined as ages 18 through 64. Of the studies included in this review, 40% were of randomized controlled trials, with 1 being a pilot trial study and the other being a feasibility trial. 2 pilot studies were also included, and quasi-experimental designs were present in 3 of the articles included in this review, and observational studies such as cohort, cross-sectional, ecological, and descriptive studies accounted for 4 of the included articles. Only 3 of the studies cited minimum sample size requirements based on a priori power analyses. Statistical analysis was not presented in 2 of the 15 articles reviewed. As we know from our literature review, many definitions exist for gardening and horticultural-based interventions that can vary by type and setting, and this was present in all the articles reviewed. A majority of the studies reviewed utilized school gardens, either via curriculum integration, after-school programs, or a summer program, as their intervention. 2 of the remaining studies utilized community gardens, 2 utilized home-based gardens, and 1 study had the intervention take place in an early care and education center. Additionally, only 1 study specified what plants were to be grown within the intervention, which was vegetables only. Most of the gardening and horticultural interventions were multi-component, meaning the intervention had at least 2 components, one of which included gardening. A small percentage of included studies did not have additional components aside from gardening in their intervention. Of the included studies with multi-component interventions, 4 included an educational component. These educational activities included gardening parallels in math and science courses, benefits of physical activity, lessons on how to compost, and general education on nutrition, horticultural, and plant science. 2 studies included an additional physical activity intervention, and 4 included both an educational component and additional hands-on activities that were not associated with gardening or horticultural, such as cooking demonstrations and activities related to environmental improvements, sustainability, and conservation. For studies aimed at the younger demographic, such as preschool-age children, songs, games, and other interactive learning activities involving garden maintenance and taste tests were also included in the intervention. Included studies also varied in terms of how they measured physical activity levels. 10 of the included studies examined physical activity as a primary outcome, and the remaining 5 examined physical activity as a secondary outcome. 12 of the included studies used accelerometry, self-reported surveys or questionnaires, or a combination of both as measurements of physical activity. Of this majority, accelerometry was used exclusively in 5 studies. 5 studies used exclusively self-reported data, and 2 used a combination of both. 1 included study used a combination of self-reported data, accelerometry, and direct observation to measure changes in physical activity. Another included study utilized both direct observation and accelerometry, and another that examined physical activity changes in older adults utilized the 6-minute walking test. The majority of reviewed studies examined outcomes related to gardening and horticultural interventions in the preschool-aged children, and adolescent age groups. 4 of these studies determined that there was no association between the implementation of a gardening or horticultural-based intervention and physical activity levels, while 8 of these studies found that gardening and horticultural-based interventions improve physical activity, including a reviewed study composed of 2 pilot studies. However, of the studies that demonstrated improvements, this was not statistically significant in 2 of these studies when controlling for covariates. Of the studies that yielded statistically significant results, Duration of the gardening or horticultural-based intervention was not a determinant of success, as outlined in Figure 2, ranging from 6 weeks to 1 year. However, all of the studies that yielded statistically significant results utilized a school garden component, with the majority of the gardening and horticultural-based interventions being implemented into the school or preschool curriculum, and one implemented into an after-school program. Additionally, significant outcomes were found in different types of study designs. Most of the studies utilized either an observational or randomized controlled study design, but they also included pilot studies and quasi-experimental designs. Lastly, the majority of reviewed studies examined changes in physical activity in addition to other health-related outcomes, including fruit and vegetable intake, BMI, fast food consumption and frequency, nutrition and plant science knowledge, attitudes and preferences towards fruits and vegetables, willingness to consume new fruits and vegetables, and mental well-being. Of these studies, 3 also examined household demographics such as poverty, parental physical activity levels, and home availability of fruits, vegetables, and junk food in addition to physical activity. Correspondingly, of the 15 reviewed studies, 4 examined mostly older adults, with 75% of them determining that a gardening or horticultural-based intervention improved physical activities for this age group. However, of these 3 studies, only 2 were deemed statistically significant. As shown in Figure 3 on the slide, and similar to the previous age group, the duration of intervention was not a determinant of success, with statistically significant interventions ranging from 1 month to 1 year. Of the 2 statistically significant studies, the gardening and horticultural-based interventions were implemented either in the community setting or home-based. In both studies, all gardening equipment was provided to participants and included a mentor, such as a horticultural therapist or a master gardener. However, each statistically significant study differed in research design. One study was of a randomized controlled trial, and the other was a quasi-experimental study. All included studies for this age group examined changes in physical activity in addition to other health-related outcomes. Other health-related outcomes included were fruit and vegetable consumption, BMI, waist, circumference, weight, physical performance, quality of life, overall health, cortisol, and telomerase biomarkers. Psychological health benefits were also examined in all studies and included mental well-being, quality of life, presence of depression, social support, and participation in social activities. Lastly, the success of intervention in terms of participant satisfaction and feasibility, which was measured in terms of accrual, retention, and satisfaction, were also examined in 3 studies. As I mentioned in earlier slides, the objective of this review was to determine if gardening and horticultural-based interventions improved physical activity. The efficacy of this type of intervention is complex and requires a systematic and comprehensive assessment of existing interventions. Overall, 8 studies reported statistically significant changes in physical activity levels following the implementation of a gardening or horticultural-based intervention. These results are consistent with recent studies outlining improvements in physical activity with the implementation of after-school interventions and previous meta-analysis indicating that behavioral strategies are superior to cognitive strategy with older adults. Additionally, age groups of the majority of the studies reviewed consisted of children, adolescents, and older adults. Although some studies included results on parental physical activity, this gap in research for the general adult age group is likely due to the time commitment of ongoing after-school or after-work programs. Nevertheless, the health of both the child and adult populations are critical when addressing the obesity crisis, as the health of children today represent the health of adults in the future, and the older adult population represents the fastest growing demographic in the U.S. Childhood obesity increases the risk for obesity and NCDs in adulthood, and obesity in older adults results in increased medical costs, decreased physical functioning, and increased rates of institutionalization and morbidity and mortality. The duration of interventions varied greatly among the studies reviewed, and as illustrated in previous slides, did not affect their efficacy. This is consistent with other systematic reviews analyzing the health outcomes of year-long studies within school-aged children, as well as systematic review and meta-analysis on the intervention features associated with increasing physical activity in adults. Although not all studies reviewed for children and adolescents yielded statistically significant results in favor of gardening or horticultural interventions increasing physical activity, they were favorable for other health-related outcomes, including vegetable intake and preference, nutrition knowledge, decreased BMI, etc., that were deemed statistically significant. Additionally, the majority of the studies reviewed in this age group conducted the gardening or horticultural-based intervention in a school setting. This is also consistent with current research, as schools are considered an ideal environment to implement strategies and interventions to promote physical activity. They are also considered among the most influential settings for supporting and encouraging children to participate in the recommended amount of physical activity. Of the studies reviewed in this age group, 3 were conducted within low-income populations and found that students experiencing household poverty observed the greatest benefit from school gardens. This finding is a useful addition to current research, as community gardens are especially important for low-income and/or food-insecure individuals living in food deserts, as it reduces the need to purchase fresh fruits and vegetables at the grocery store. Similarly to the younger demographic, the studies reviewed for older adults did not all yield statistically significant results in favor of gardening or horticultural interventions, increasing physical activity. However, all studies examined other health and psychological related outcomes in addition to physical activity that were significant, including improved muscle mass, aerobic endurance, hand dexterity, cognitive ability, reported fruit and vegetable consumption, engagement in social activities, decreased weight, circumference, etc. Lastly, while pain was associated with older adults, particularly with forward-bending activities, given the prior research, the resulting increases in quality of life offset this undesirable effect. Although the results from studies presented in this review provide valuable insight into the efficacy of utilizing gardening and horticultural-based interventions to improve physical activity among different populations, there is significant limitations. The first being that the systematic review and search results were conducted and screened by only one reviewer. Current literature recommends that study eligibility screening is conducted by at least 2 independent reviewers. Additionally, only 6 of the studies reviewed conducted randomization of their participants. Without randomization, researchers increase the risk for selection bias, systematic differences among study groups, and less accurate interpretation of the effects of intervention. Quasi-experimental and non-controlled study designs were used in 3 of the studies reviewed, which have numerous limitations, including lack of randomized control groups, influence of confounding variables, threats to internal validity, and overall weaker conclusions. Staying on the topic of study design, 4 of the reviewed studies were of observational design, which also have lower validity, which makes it necessary to assess all possible explanations for an association, including bias, confounding, chance, and cause. A small sample size was another limitation with 10 of the included studies, which increases risk of chance. Furthermore, 8 of the studies reviewed uses self-reported data, either standalone or in conjunction with accelerometry, as a measurement of physical activity. Although questionnaires and accelerometry are widely used, the gold standard to measure physical activity energy expenditure is the double-labeled water method, or DLW method. Accelerometry is the second preferred method to the DLW method, which was used exclusively in only 5 of the included studies. However, it is recommended that body composition should be taken into account when using accelerometry to measure physical activity, and only 3 of the studies that use accelerometry also measured BMI. Moreover, another limitation with the use of self-reported data via surveys or questionnaires for data analysis is the high risk of bias. Overall, determining the true effect of gardening and horticultural-based interventions on health is difficult, as the implementation of interventions ranged widely in both intensity and duration. Well-designed interventions require multiple sites within schools or communities to implement gardens and randomization of these sites. Furthermore, quote-unquote real-world conditions may make it hard to implement programs as intended. Many of the interventions have focused on a single community or population rather than a broad range. Despite the limitations of the evaluated research, it yields several future research opportunities and implications for practice. The first opportunity is to address the aforementioned limitations of the included studies. The second opportunity is to increase both the duration of intervention and the sample size. This would be beneficial to not only strengthen the results, but the effects of long-term gardening and horticultural-based intervention is under-researched overall. Additionally, the interventions association with physical activities can be reviewed to determine the most effective method for implementation. Future studies should also concentrate on strategies that increase self-efficacy, self-management, and enjoyment of gardening and horticultural-based interventions, as this will increase participation in physical activity building activities throughout the lifespan. Furthermore, if implementing a multi-component gardening or horticultural intervention for the child and adolescent populations, evidence-based curricula that is age-specific to ensure the intervention is tailored to the correct developmental stage should be examined to identify the efficacy of intervention among the age group. Lastly, future research is an effective way to increase parental engagement, especially in low-resource households, as they tend to have a limited time to participate in interventions overall and have also the most limited research amongst age groups in regards to gardening and horticultural-based interventions. In conclusion, although the evidence is somewhat mixed, most available studies suggest a small but positive influence of gardening and horticultural-based interventions on physical activity. Gardening and horticultural-based interventions had the most significant impact when used in conjunction with other behavioral strategies such as nutrition education. Presented on the screen are the references I used throughout the systematic review. This concludes the summary of my capstone project. I appreciate your time, and if you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to me directly via email. Thank you.